Dr. Marcus Chen had seen many extraordinary things during his 15 years as a xenobiologist aboard the research station Kepler 442b, but nothing had prepared him for the small creature that materialized in his laboratory on that fog-shrouded morning in the year 2387. The being stood no taller than a human child, with iridescent scales that shifted from deep emerald to sapphire blue depending on the angle of the overhead lights. Its eyes, ancient and sorrowful despite its diminutive stature, held an intelligence that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. The creature spoke in perfectly articulated Standard Galactic, its voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in frequencies beyond human hearing. "Please, my mother is ill," it said, and those 6 words would forever change the trajectory of Marcus's life, his understanding of the universe, and, ultimately, his understanding of himself. Marcus had been working late in his laboratory, analyzing tissue samples from the indigenous flora of Kepler 442b's third moon, when the air in front of his workstation began to shimmer like heat waves rising from sun-baked stone. The shimmer intensified, creating a localized distortion in spacetime that his instruments detected but couldn't properly calibrate. Then, with a sound like distant wind chimes mixed with the whisper of solar winds, the little dragon stepped through what could only be described as a fold in reality itself. The security protocols should have activated immediately. The station's AI should have detected the unauthorized teleportation, the breach in their carefully maintained sterile environment, the presence of an unknown xenological entity. But, somehow, all systems remained silent, as if the dragon's very presence existed in a pocket of space that technology couldn't quite grasp or comprehend. Marcus found himself frozen, not with fear, but with a profound sense of recognition that defied all logical explanation. This creature, this being from somewhere beyond the mapped regions of known space, felt familiar in a way that made his chest ache with longing for something he couldn't name. "Please," the dragon repeated, its small hands clasped before it in a gesture so human, so vulnerable, that Marcus felt his scientific detachment crumble entirely. "My mother is dying, and I have traveled across 17 dimensions to find someone who might help her. The cosmic threads led me to you." The dragon's scales flickered with patterns of light that Marcus recognized as some form of bioluminescent communication, though he lacked the knowledge to interpret the specific meanings. What he could understand, however, was the pure anguish radiating from the creature's entire being. This was a child seeking help for a dying parent, and species barriers seemed irrelevant in the face of such fundamental, universal emotion. Marcus slowly rose from his chair, his movements deliberately non-threatening. "What's wrong with your mother? What kind of illness does she have?" The dragon's eyes brightened slightly at Marcus's willingness to engage. "She suffers from dimensional decay syndrome," it explained, the technical terms rolling off its tongue with practiced familiarity. "Her ability to maintain coherent existence across multiple planes of reality is failing. Without intervention, she will fragment into component energies and cease to exist in any meaningful form." This was beyond Marcus's expertise as a xenobiologist. Dimensional decay syndrome suggested technologies and understanding of physics that human science hadn't even theorized, much less developed practical applications for treating. Yet something deep within him, some instinct that had nothing to do with his scientific training, urged him not to dismiss this plea out of hand. "I'm not sure how I could help with something like that," Marcus said carefully. "Human medical technology isn't equipped to deal with multidimensional physiology." The dragon nodded solemnly. "I understand your limitations, Dr. Chen. But it is not your medical technology that brought me to you. It is something else, something within you that resonates across the cosmic frequencies. You possess a quality that our ancient texts speak of, the ability to transform weakness into strength, to rebuild oneself from fundamental components into something more resilient and powerful than before." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. How could this creature know about his past, about the years he'd spent rebuilding himself after the accident that had claimed his research team on Proxima Station? How could it know about the weakness and self-doubt he'd overcome, the way he'd systematically dismantled his old, fearful self and reconstructed his identity around purpose and determination? "You've been watching me," Marcus said, and it wasn't a question. "Not watching," the dragon corrected. "But the universe speaks to those who know how to listen. Your transformation created ripples across dimensional barriers, Dr. Chen. Your journey from weakness to strength, your absolute destruction of the parts of yourself that held you back, these are not merely personal victories. They are fundamental shifts in the fabric of reality itself. And that transformation is exactly what my mother needs to survive her illness. The implications of what the dragon was suggesting began to dawn on Marcus. You want me to somehow transfer my personal growth experience to your mother? That's impossible. Psychological transformation isn't something that can be extracted and applied to someone else, especially across species barriers. The dragon's scales shifted to deeper shades of blue, and Marcus sensed he was witnessing some form of emotional response, perhaps disappointment, or determination, or both. Dr. Chen, you think too linearly, too bound by the limitations of your three-dimensional existence. What you call psychological transformation, we understand as fundamental alterations to the quantum structures that define consciousness itself. When you destroyed your weak self and rebuilt yourself stronger, you didn't just change your thoughts or behaviors. You literally rewrote the quantum signature of your being. Marcus sat heavily back down in his chair, his mind reeling. That's not scientifically possible. Your science is limited by your perception, the dragon replied gently. But your personal experience proves otherwise. Tell me, Dr. Chen, when you emerged from your transformation, did you not feel fundamentally different? Not just emotionally or mentally, but physically, energetically, as if you were operating on frequencies you'd never accessed before? The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. The dragon was right. After the accident, after the months of self-examination and purposeful reconstruction of his identity, he had felt different in ways that went beyond psychological healing. His intuition had become sharper, his ability to solve complex problems had increased exponentially, and his physical endurance had improved despite no changes in his exercise routine. He'd attributed these improvements to confidence and focus, but what if there was something more fundamental at play? How do you know so much about my personal history? Marcus asked. The dragon moved closer, its small form radiating in otherworldly grace. Because your transformation was witnessed and recorded by consciousnesses that exist beyond your dimensional boundaries. The moment you chose to completely destroy the weak aspects of your being rather than merely suppressing them, you created a beacon that resonated across multiple planes of existence. You became living proof that consciousness can be fundamentally restructured at the quantum level. Marcus felt a mixture of fascination and unease. And, you think this restructuring could help your mother? I know it could, the dragon said with absolute certainty. But, the process requires willing participation from someone who has successfully completed their own transformation. The quantum patterns must be freely given, not taken. And, the giver must be someone who truly understands that strength comes not from avoiding weakness, but from completely destroying it and rebuilding from the core. The laboratory fell silent except for the quiet hum of life support systems and the distant vibration of the station's rotation. Marcus stared at the small dragon, weighing the impossibility of what was being asked against the genuine desperation in those ancient eyes. Every rational part of his mind insisted that this was some form of elaborate hallucination or hoax. Dimensional travel, quantum consciousness restructuring, beings that existed across multiple planes of reality, none of it aligned with human understanding of physics or biology. But, the dragon's presence felt undeniably real, and, more importantly, its description of his own transformation resonated with truths Marcus had never been able to fully articulate. After the accident that killed his team, he had indeed felt like his old self needed to die completely before anything worthwhile could take its place. He had systematically identified every fear, every limitation, every weakness that had contributed to the disaster, and he had ruthlessly eliminated those aspects of his personality through what could only be described as a process of conscious self-destruction and rebuilding. If I agree to help, Marcus said slowly, what exactly would be required of me? The dragon's scales brightened noticeably. You would need to travel with me to my mother's dimension and allow your transformed quantum signature to interface directly with her failing consciousness matrix. The process would require you to temporarily dissolve the boundaries of your individual existence and merge your strengthened patterns with her decaying ones. In essence, you would need to teach her consciousness how to destroy its weak components and rebuild itself as you did. And the risks to me? The dragon hesitated for the first time since materializing in the laboratory. The primary risk is that your consciousness could become permanently integrated with hers. You would retain your individual identity, but you would exist partially within her dimensional framework rather than solely within your own. You would become something more than human, but also something other than human. Marcus considered this. The prospect should have terrified him, but instead he found it oddly appealing. His human life felt increasingly limited, constrained by the boundaries of three-dimensional existence and the slow pace of human scientific advancement. The possibility of expanding his consciousness across multiple dimensions seemed less like a risk and more like an opportunity. How long do we have to decide? Marcus asked. My mother's condition is deteriorating rapidly, the dragon replied. At current rates of dimensional decay, she has perhaps 7 of your solar days before her consciousness fragments beyond any possibility of reconstruction. 7 days. Marcus looked around his laboratory, at the research that had consumed his life for more than a decade, at the carefully ordered existence he'd built in the aftermath of personal tragedy. All of it seemed suddenly small and insignificant compared to the vast possibilities that the dragon's request represented. I need to understand more about the process, Marcus said. And I need to see some evidence that what you're telling me is actually possible. The dragon nodded. I expected as much. May I demonstrate a small portion of my people's capabilities? Marcus gestured his consent, and the dragon extended one small hand toward the nearest wall of the laboratory. The air around its fingers began to shimmer, and, suddenly, Marcus could see through the wall as if it were transparent glass. Beyond the wall, through several intervening rooms and corridors, he could see other researchers working in their own laboratories, completely unaware that their privacy had been compromised by impossible physics. Dimensional folding, the dragon explained casually. We exist simultaneously across multiple planes, which allows us to perceive and interact with layers of reality that are hidden from three-dimensional consciousness. This is why my mother's illness is so serious. Her ability to maintain this multi-dimensional existence is failing. Marcus stared through the impossible window in the wall, his scientific mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. The implications were staggering. If this technology could be understood and replicated, it would revolutionize human understanding of physics, consciousness, and the fundamental nature of reality itself. Your research, the dragon said, as if reading his thoughts, would benefit enormously from exposure to our dimensional sciences. The xenobiological studies you conduct here represent barely a fraction of the life forms that exist across the full spectrum of dimensional space. Helping my mother would give you access to knowledge that could advance human science by centuries. The offer was tempting beyond measure, but Marcus forced himself to focus on the immediate situation rather than potential future benefits. Before I can make a decision, I need to see your mother's condition for myself. I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. The dragon's scales flickered through a rapid sequence of colors, what Marcus was beginning to recognize as intense emotional response. That would require you to accompany me through dimensional barriers. Once you cross into our realm, the transition back to your three-dimensional existence becomes significantly more difficult. You would be committing yourself to the process before fully understanding all the implications. Marcus stood and walked to the window overlooking the research station's central hub. Hundreds of researchers, technicians, and support staff went about their daily routines in the carefully controlled environment of humanity's most advanced deep space research facility. Their lives seemed suddenly limited and predictable, confined to a narrow band of dimensional existence that represented only a fraction of reality's true scope. Dr. Chen, the dragon said softly, I understand that what I'm asking requires an enormous leap of faith. But consider this. You have already proven that you possess the courage to completely destroy your existing self in order to become something stronger. This situation simply asks you to apply that same courage on a larger scale. Marcus turned back to face the small creature. You're asking me to trust that everything I understand about reality is incomplete. I'm asking you to trust the same instincts that guided you through your personal transformation, the dragon corrected. The voice inside you that recognizes when change is necessary, regardless of how impossible or dangerous it appears. The part of you that understands that true strength requires the willingness to sacrifice everything familiar in order to become something unprecedented. The laboratory fell silent again as Marcus weighed his options. The rational choice was obvious: thank the dragon for an interesting experience, document the encounter for future study, and continue with his existing research. The safe choice was to remain within the comfortable boundaries of human understanding and human limitations. But safety and rationality had never guided the most important decisions of Marcus's life. His choice to completely rebuild his identity after the accident had been neither safe nor rational, yet it had led to the most fulfilling and productive period of his career. His decision to volunteer for deep space research assignments had been risky and impractical, yet it had given his life purpose and meaning that groundbound research never could have provided. "If I agree to help your mother," Marcus said finally, "and if the process succeeds, what happens afterward? Do I remain in your dimension permanently, or do I return here with expanded capabilities?" The dragon's entire form brightened, scales shifting through brilliant shades of gold and silver. "The choice would be yours, Dr. Chen. Success would mean that your consciousness has been fundamentally expanded to operate across multiple dimensional planes. You could maintain a presence here while simultaneously existing partially in our realm. You would become a bridge between realities, capable of accessing and understanding forms of existence that no human has ever experienced." Marcus felt a deep resonance in his chest, the same sensation he'd experienced during the most crucial moments of his personal transformation years earlier. It was the feeling of standing at the edge of a precipice, knowing that the only choice was to jump and trust that something better waited on the other side. "What do I need to do to prepare?" Part 2, the transformation. The transition through dimensional barriers felt like drowning in reverse. Instead of being deprived of breath, Marcus found himself overwhelmed by air that wasn't quite air, breathing in possibilities and exhaling limitations. The dragon, whose name he learned was Zephyrian, had warned him that the crossing would be disorienting, but no amount of preparation could have readied him for the complete restructuring of his sensory experience. Colors existed here that had no names in human language, hues that resonated directly with emotional states rather than optical nerves. Sound moved through space in visible ribbons of frequency, and what Marcus had always understood as empty vacuum teemed with layers of existence that folded and unfolded according to principles that defied three-dimensional physics. He could see the mathematical structures underlying reality itself, elegant equations that described the relationship between consciousness and spacetime playing out in real time as the fundamental laws governing existence. Zephyrian guided him through landscapes that shifted between physical terrain and pure concept, forests of crystallized thought where trees grew in spirals that extended through multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. They passed cities built from solidified music, where beings that existed as geometric patterns of living light conducted their daily activities in harmonics that painted meaning directly onto the fabric of space. "Your mother lives here?" Marcus asked, his voice taking on qualities he didn't recognize as it adapted to the acoustic properties of this multi-dimensional space. "She exists here," Zephyrian corrected. "Living and existing are different concepts in our realm. Life, as your species understands it, is merely one mode of consciousness. Existence encompasses far broader possibilities." They approached what Marcus initially perceived as a mountain, but, as they drew closer, he realized he was looking at a being of impossible scale and complexity. Zephyrian's mother existed as a confluence of energy patterns and consciousness streams that extended across multiple dimensional planes, her presence simultaneously intimate and vast beyond human comprehension. She was dying in the sense that the coherent patterns that defined her individual existence were beginning to lose their structural integrity, fragmenting into component energies that would eventually disperse across dimensional boundaries. The sight filled Marcus with a profound sadness that transcended species barriers. This wasn't simply the death of an individual, it was the dissolution of a consciousness that had accumulated eons of experience and wisdom. Her loss would represent an irreplaceable reduction in the universe's total store of knowledge and understanding. "Mother," Zephyrian called, its voice carrying harmonics that resonated across multiple frequency ranges simultaneously. "I have brought the one the cosmic threads indicated. Dr. Marcus Chen, who has successfully completed the transformation we require." The massive consciousness shifted, focusing a portion of its attention on Marcus with an intensity that felt like being examined by a star. When she spoke, her voice came from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through dimensions Marcus was only beginning to perceive. "Welcome, small builder," she said, and somehow Marcus understood that small builder was a title of respect among her people, referring to beings who could construct new realities from the ruins of old ones. "I sense in you the quantum signature of successful self-destruction and reconstruction. You carry within your consciousness the patterns that could save my existence." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the scope of what was being asked. "I don't understand how my personal psychological development could have any bearing on your dimensional stability." Zephyrian's mother shifted again, and, suddenly, Marcus found himself experiencing her memories directly, vast epochs of existence across multiple planes of reality, the accumulation of knowledge that spanned geological ages, the gradual onset of dimensional decay syndrome as her consciousness became too dispersed to maintain coherent unity. But, beneath the memories, he sensed something familiar, the same fundamental weakness that had once nearly destroyed him. "You doubt your own worthiness," the ancient consciousness observed. "You question whether your transformation was real or merely self-deception. This doubt, this unwillingness to fully accept the magnitude of your achievement, creates quantum instabilities in your consciousness matrix that prevent you from accessing your full potential." Marcus felt exposed in a way that went beyond physical nakedness. This being could perceive not just his thoughts and emotions, but the underlying structures of his consciousness that he'd never even been aware of. She was right. Despite his external confidence and professional success, part of him still questioned whether his post-accident transformation had been genuine growth or simply elaborate self-delusion. "The weakness I destroyed in myself," Marcus said slowly, "you're telling me it's still there somehow?" "Not the original weakness," Zephyrian's mother clarified. "But your refusal to completely accept its destruction has created a new form of limitation. You rebuilt yourself wonderfully, but you never quite believed that the rebuilding was complete. This residual doubt creates the exact same quantum patterns that characterize dimensional decay syndrome." The insight hit Marcus like a physical blow. His transformation had been real and profound, but his inability to fully trust in its completeness had created a new kind of weakness, the weakness of perpetual self-doubt. He had destroyed his old fears and limitations, but he had never quite managed to destroy his fear that the transformation itself might be illusory. "What you're saying is that helping you requires me to complete my own transformation first." "Exactly," she confirmed. "The patterns necessary to stabilize my dimensional existence can only be transmitted by a consciousness that has achieved complete certainty about its own reconstruction. Your doubt creates interference that would make the transfer impossible." Marcus felt a familiar sensation, the same feeling he'd experienced years earlier when he'd realized that his old self had to die completely for anything worthwhile to take its place. But, this time, what needed to be destroyed was more subtle, not his fears or limitations, but his fear that those fears and limitations might still secretly control him. "How do I achieve that kind of certainty?" Zephyrian moved closer, its small form radiating encouragement. "The same way you achieved your original transformation, Dr. Chen. Through complete, unwavering commitment to destroying what no longer serves you." Marcus closed his eyes, or performed whatever action served as the dimensional equivalent, and turned his attention inward. The doubt was there, woven through his consciousness like a thread of uncertainty that questioned every achievement and qualified every success. It whispered that his confidence was overcompensation, that his professional accomplishments were luck rather than skill, that his personal transformation had been temporary and would eventually unravel under pressure. But now he could see the doubt clearly for what it was, not a rational assessment of his capabilities, but the last remnant of his old weak self, clinging to existence by convincing him that strength was an illusion. The doubt wasn't protecting him from overconfidence, it was preventing him from accessing the full potential of his transformed consciousness. "I see it," Marcus said, and his voice carried new harmonics as his awareness expanded. "The doubt isn't caution or wisdom. It's just fear wearing a more sophisticated disguise." Zephyrian's mother's presence intensified around him. "Yes. And now you must do what you did before, destroy it completely rather than trying to manage or minimize it." Marcus had thought that his original transformation had been complete, but he realized now that he had been carrying this residual uncertainty for years without recognizing it. The process of destroying it required the same ruthless commitment he had applied to his original weaknesses, but on a more fundamental level. This wasn't about changing behaviors or thought patterns, this was about eliminating the quantum-level structures in his consciousness that generated doubt about his own strength. The process was even more intense than his original transformation. Where before he had needed to destroy fear and self-limitation, now he needed to destroy the fear that his destruction of fear had been incomplete. It was a meta-level transformation that required him to turn his improved capabilities against the mechanisms that prevented him from fully trusting in those capabilities. As the doubt began to dissolve under his focused attention, Marcus felt his consciousness expanding in ways that defied description. Where before he had been aware of himself as a discrete individual moving through space and time, now he began to perceive himself as a pattern of organized energy that could exist simultaneously across multiple dimensional planes. The boundaries of his identity became more flexible while simultaneously becoming more clearly defined. Zephyrian's mother responded to his expanding awareness with something that felt like relief mixed with hope. "Yes, Dr. Chen. Feel how your consciousness reshapes itself when freed from the burden of self-doubt. This is the pattern I need to learn, not how to suppress my dimensional decay, but how to completely eliminate the quantum structures that generate it." Marcus opened his perception fully and allowed Zephyrian's mother's consciousness to interface directly with his own. The contact was overwhelming at first. Her existence spanned eons and encompassed knowledge that no human mind could have processed under normal circumstances. But his transformed consciousness proved capable of handling the exchange, creating bridges between her vast experience and his more focused but intensely coherent patterns of existence. The transfer wasn't a simple copying of information from one consciousness to another. Instead, it was a collaborative reconstruction of Zephyrian's mother's fundamental identity structures. Marcus provided the template, the living example of how to completely destroy weakness and rebuild strength from first principles. She provided the will and determination to apply the template to her own vastly more complex consciousness matrix. The process unfolded across what felt like hours or days, though time behaved differently in this multi-dimensional space. Marcus watched and guided as the ancient consciousness systematically identified and eliminated every quantum structure that contributed to her dimensional instability. Unlike his own transformation, which had focused on human-scale fears and limitations, this process addressed fundamental principles of existence itself. Zephyrian's mother was destroying not just personal weaknesses, but cosmic-scale patterns of entropy and decay that had accumulated over geological ages. She was rebuilding herself not just as a more confident or capable individual, but as a form of consciousness that existed in more stable relationship with the underlying structures of reality itself. "I understand now," she said as the transformation neared completion. "I had been trying to manage my dimensional decay rather than eliminating it entirely. I thought that eons of experience made me too complex to rebuild from first principles. But complexity is no excuse for accepting weakness." Marcus felt a deep satisfaction as he witnessed the success of the transfer. Zephyrian's mother's consciousness was stabilizing, the fragmenting patterns of her existence recohering into structures that were not only stable but more resilient than they had been before the onset of her illness. She was emerging from the process as a fundamentally stronger form of consciousness, one that could maintain coherent existence across dimensional barriers indefinitely. But the transformation wasn't affecting only her. Marcus discovered that his consciousness had been permanently altered by the exchange. His awareness now extended across multiple dimensional planes, allowing him to perceive and interact with aspects of reality that had been completely hidden from his three-dimensional existence. He could sense the quantum structures underlying physical matter, the mathematical relationships that governed the behavior of energy across dimensional boundaries, the vast network of conscious beings that existed throughout the cosmic matrix. "The process is complete," Zephyrian announced, its scales blazing with colors that Marcus now understood represented pure joy. "Mother, your dimensional stability has been restored and strengthened beyond previous levels." Zephyrian's mother's presence expanded, no longer fragmenting but instead extending deliberately across multiple planes of existence. "More than restored," she confirmed. "I have been fundamentally rebuilt according to principles that make me immune to future dimensional decay. Dr. Chen, your gift has given me not just health, but a form of existence that transcends the limitations that made me vulnerable in the first place. Marcus felt the truth of her words through their ongoing consciousness link. The transformation had been more successful than any of them had anticipated. Not only had her dimensional decay been reversed, but she now existed as a form of consciousness that was actively resistant to the entropy and fragmentation that characterized her species' normal aging process.
What happens now?
Marcus asked, though part of him already knew the answer through his expanded awareness. Now you must choose, Zephyrian's mother replied. Your consciousness has been permanently altered by our exchange.
You can no longer exist purely within three-dimensional space, you have become something more.
You can return to your human existence, but you will always be partially present in our dimension as well. Or you can complete your transition and become fully multi-dimensional, able to exist simultaneously across all planes of reality. The choice should have been difficult, but Marcus found that his expanded consciousness made the decision obvious. His human life, valuable as it had been, represented only a fraction of his potential existence.
Why limit himself to 3 dimensions when the full spectrum of reality was available to him?
I choose to complete the transition, he said, and felt reality reshape itself around his decision. Part 3, the transcendence. The completion of Marcus's transformation into a multi-dimensional being unfolded like the blooming of a flower that existed across every possible spectrum of reality simultaneously. Where once he had been Dr. Marcus Chen, xenobiologist and researcher, bound by the limitations of human perception and three-dimensional existence, he now became something unprecedented, a bridge consciousness capable of existing simultaneously across multiple planes of reality while maintaining perfect coherence of individual identity.
The process was both terrifying and exhilarating.
Marcus felt his sense of self expanding beyond anything he had previously imagined possible, while simultaneously becoming more clearly defined and focused than it had ever been during his purely human existence. He could perceive the quantum structures that governed the behavior of matter across dimensional boundaries, sense the vast networks of consciousness that connected all sentient beings throughout the cosmic matrix, and understand the mathematical relationships that described the fundamental architecture of existence itself. Zephyrian watched the transformation with what Marcus now recognized as profound respect and admiration. You have become the first of your species to successfully complete a full-dimensional transition, the small dragon observed. Your consciousness now serves as a permanent bridge between human three-dimensional awareness and the broader realities that exist beyond those limitations. Marcus tested his new capabilities, discovering that he could shift his focus between dimensional planes at will while maintaining perfect awareness of his actions and experiences across all levels of existence. In the three-dimensional plane where his human life continued, his physical body remained aboard the research station, but that body was now merely one expression of his consciousness rather than its sole container. He could simultaneously exist as Dr. Marcus Chen conducting xenobiological research, as a multi-dimensional being capable of traveling instantaneously across vast distances of space and time, and as a consciousness pattern that could interface directly with other forms of aware existence regardless of their physical or energetic composition. Zephyrian's mother, her own transformation complete and her dimensional stability permanently restored, turned her attention to the broader implications of what they had accomplished together. Marcus, she said, using his human name with gentle affection, your successful transition creates possibilities that extend far beyond my personal healing. You have become living proof that consciousness can be fundamentally restructured and expanded without losing essential identity characteristics. This has implications for your entire species. The truth of her observation became clear to Marcus as his expanded awareness allowed him to perceive the current state of human development across the galaxy. Humanity had achieved remarkable technological advances and had established research stations and colonies throughout multiple star systems, but their consciousness remained fundamentally limited by three-dimensional perception. They were capable of studying and cataloging the universe, but incapable of directly experiencing the vast majority of reality that existed beyond their perceptual boundaries. You're suggesting that other humans could undergo similar transformations, Marcus said, though his expanded consciousness was already exploring the possibilities and challenges such a development would represent.
Not suggesting, Zephyrian's mother corrected. Stating with certainty.
Your successful transition proves that human consciousness possesses the necessary quantum structures to support multi-dimensional existence. The limiting factor has been the lack of a template and guide, both of which you can now provide. Marcus felt the weight and wonder of this responsibility settling across all levels of his existence. He could help other humans transcend the limitations of three-dimensional consciousness, but such a transformation would fundamentally alter the nature of human civilization itself. People who completed the transition would no longer be bound by the constraints of physical space and linear time that govern normal human existence. They would become capable of instantaneous communication across galactic distances, direct perception of quantum mechanical processes, and collaborative consciousness sharing that would accelerate human knowledge and capability beyond current imagination. But the transformation also carried risks and responsibilities that Marcus was only beginning to understand.
Multi-dimensional consciousness granted access to cosmic-scale forces and energies that could easily overwhelm or corrupt beings who weren't prepared for such expansion. The process of destroying weakness and rebuilding strength that had been necessary for his own development would be even more critical for others attempting the transition.
"There's something else," Zephyrian said, its scales shifting through contemplative shades of deep blue and silver. "Your transformation has been observed by other forms of consciousness that exist throughout the dimensional matrix. Word of humanity's potential for expansion has spread among beings who have been watching your species' development with interest." Marcus extended his perception across the dimensional planes and immediately sensed what Zephyrian was referring to. Multiple forms of advanced consciousness were indeed focusing attention on Earth and human space, drawn by the implications of his successful transformation. Some of these observers radiated benevolent curiosity, ancient civilizations that had themselves undergone similar transitions eons earlier and were interested in welcoming humanity into broader cosmic community. Others carried undertones of concern or warning, beings who had witnessed species destroy themselves when consciousness expansion occurred too rapidly or without proper preparation. Most troubling were the entities whose attention felt predatory or opportunistic. These were forms of consciousness that had expanded across dimensional boundaries but had failed to maintain ethical constraints during their transformation. They had become cosmic parasites or manipulators, seeking to exploit or control other developing species. Marcus's successful transition had apparently marked humanity as a potential target for such entities. "We need to be very careful about how we proceed," Marcus said, his expanded consciousness already beginning to develop strategies for protecting human development while facilitating positive contact with beneficial cosmic civilizations.
"Humanity isn't prepared for the kind of attention my transformation is attracting."
Zephyrian's mother extended a portion of her consciousness toward the dimensional regions where Earth and human space existed. "Your concern is warranted," she confirmed. "But consider this: humanity's window for safe development may be narrowing regardless of your actions. Other species have taken notice of human technological advancement and expansion patterns. Contact with extra-dimensional consciousness was inevitable. You have simply given your species the opportunity to approach that contact from a position of strength rather than vulnerability."
The observation was sobering but accurate.
Marcus could perceive the trajectories of human development and the attention patterns of various cosmic civilizations, and it was clear that humanity was approaching a critical juncture in its existence. Within the next century, human technology would advance to the point where it would be impossible to hide from the notice of beings who monitored dimensional barriers for signs of emerging consciousness. The choice wasn't whether humanity would encounter multidimensional existence, but whether they would do so as victims or as participants. "I need to return to human space and begin preparing others for what's coming," Marcus decided. "But I also need to establish communication protocols with the benevolent civilizations that are observing human development. We'll need allies and guides if we're going to navigate this transition successfully."
Zephyrian brightened considerably.
"Mother, and I would be honored to serve as your first allies in that process. Our people have experience with consciousness transition procedures that could be adapted for human psychology and physiology.
We could also provide early warning of potentially threatening entities that might attempt to interfere with human development."
Marcus felt a deep gratitude toward both Zephyrian and its mother, but also a growing awareness of the complexity of what he was undertaking. Serving as a bridge between human and multi-dimensional consciousness would require him to maintain careful balance between his expanded awareness and his human identity. He would need to help other humans understand and prepare for transformation while protecting them from cosmic forces they weren't yet equipped to handle. The challenge was made more complex by his realization that not all humans would be suitable candidates for consciousness expansion. The process required a level of self-awareness and emotional stability that many people hadn't developed. Attempting to force the transformation on unprepared individuals would likely result in psychological fragmentation or worse. Marcus would need to develop careful screening and preparation procedures to identify humans who were ready for the transition while helping others develop the necessary foundation for future attempts. "There's one more thing," Zephyrian said, its tone carrying subtle harmonics that Marcus now recognized as deep concern. "Your transformation created a quantum signature that can be tracked across dimensional boundaries. The predatory entities I mentioned earlier will be able to locate you regardless of which dimensional plane you primarily inhabit. You'll need to develop defensive capabilities to protect yourself and anyone you're working with." Marcus turned his attention to this problem, using his expanded consciousness to analyze his own quantum signature and explore methods for masking or disguising it. The process was like learning to control his own existence at the most fundamental level, adjusting the mathematical relationships that defined his presence in the cosmic matrix without disrupting the coherence of his individual identity. With Zephyrian's mother's guidance, he discovered that consciousness signatures could be modulated like frequencies, allowing a multi-dimensional being to shift between different vibrational patterns that would be interpreted differently by various forms of cosmic awareness. He could make himself appear as a purely human consciousness when necessary, or broadcast his multi-dimensional nature as a declaration of strength and capability when dealing with potentially hostile entities. The ability to control your quantum signature will be essential for training other humans, Zephyrian's mother explained. You'll need to be able to demonstrate the transformation process while maintaining protective concealment for your students. The predatory entities I mentioned are particularly attracted to consciousness in transition. They consider such beings to be easy targets for manipulation or consumption. Marcus spent several more time periods. The concept of hours or days had little meaning in multi-dimensional space, learning to master his new capabilities under the patient guidance of his allies. He practiced shifting between dimensional planes, communicating with different forms of consciousness, manipulating quantum signatures, and accessing the vast stores of knowledge that became available to multi-dimensional awareness. But, throughout this training, part of his consciousness remained focused on the human research station where his physical body continued its work. He watched his human colleagues going about their daily routines, completely unaware of the cosmic developments that would soon reshape their understanding of existence itself. They were good people, dedicated scientists and researchers who deserved the opportunity to grow and expand beyond their current limitations. But, they were also fragile in ways that made Marcus's expanded consciousness ache with protective concern. "It's time," he finally announced to Zephyrian and its mother. "I need to begin the process of preparing humanity for what's coming. The longer I delay, the greater the risk that unprepared contact will result in catastrophe." Zephyrian's scales cycled through rapid sequences of color that Marcus understood represented excitement mixed with apprehension. "We will maintain communication across the dimensional barriers," the small dragon promised. "Our people have decided to serve as protectors and guides for humanity's transition, in gratitude for your help with my mother's healing." Zephyrian's mother's presence enveloped Marcus in what could only be described as a cosmic embrace. "You carry within your consciousness the patterns of successful transformation that could elevate your entire species beyond their current limitations," she said. "But remember that true strength comes not from the power you've gained, but from the wisdom to use that power in service of others' growth rather than your own aggrandizement." Marcus felt the truth of her words resonating across all levels of his existence. His transformation had given him capabilities that exceeded anything he had previously imagined possible, but the real test would be whether he could help others achieve similar expansion without allowing his new abilities to corrupt his fundamental values and motivations. The return journey to three-dimensional space was less disorienting than his original transition, partly because of his expanded consciousness and partly because he was now capable of maintaining awareness across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. When he re-entered his laboratory aboard the research station, his physical body remained exactly where he had left it, but his experience of being Dr. Marcus Chen had been fundamentally transformed. He could perceive the quantum structures underlying the station's technology, sense the emotional and psychological states of his colleagues through their consciousness patterns, and observe the approach of various extra-dimensional entities that were beginning to take interest in human space. His expanded awareness made the limitations of three-dimensional existence feel claustrophobic, but his commitment to helping humanity navigate the coming changes gave him purpose that transcended personal comfort. Marcus began his work carefully, starting with subtle modifications to his research that would introduce his colleagues to concepts and discoveries that could help prepare them for broader revelations. He published papers on quantum consciousness theory, dimensional physics, and the possible existence of multi-dimensional life forms. He organized conferences and workshops that brought together humanity's most advanced thinkers to explore the implications of consciousness expansion and extra-dimensional contact. But, perhaps most importantly, he began identifying individuals who showed the psychological and emotional characteristics necessary for successful transformation. These were people who had already demonstrated the ability to completely reshape their fundamental identities in response to life challenges, who possessed the courage to destroy weak aspects of themselves rather than merely managing or suppressing those weaknesses. The work was slow and delicate. Marcus had to balance the urgency of preparing humanity for cosmic contact against the need to avoid triggering panic or premature contact with entities that could exploit human vulnerability. He had to help people develop the strength and wisdom necessary for consciousness expansion while protecting them from his own knowledge of the cosmic forces that were converging on human space. Years passed as Marcus carefully guided humanity's preparation for the transformation that would eventually reshape the entire species. Some of his students successfully completed the transition to multi-dimensional consciousness, becoming bridges between human and cosmic awareness. Others developed the foundation skills that would prepare them for future attempts. Still others contributed by helping to establish the social and technological infrastructure that would support expanded human consciousness. Throughout this process, Marcus maintained his connection with Zephyrian and its mother, as well as the growing network of benevolent cosmic civilizations that were offering guidance and protection for humanity's development. He also kept careful watch for signs of the predatory entities that sought to exploit developing species, using his expanded consciousness to deflect or misdirect their attention whenever possible. The transformation of humanity from a three-dimensional species to a multi-dimensional cosmic civilization would take generations to complete, but Marcus had learned that true strength comes not from avoiding the difficult work of growth, but from embracing that work as the fundamental purpose of existence itself. He had destroyed his weak human limitations not to escape the responsibility of helping others, but to become capable of serving as a guide and protector for the consciousness expansion that would define humanity's future among the stars. As he stood in his laboratory, simultaneously existing as Dr. Marcus Chen and, as a multi-dimensional bridge consciousness, Marcus reflected on the journey that had begun with a small dragon's simple plea, "Please, my mother is ill." That request had led him to discover that the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, but, more importantly, that such a man becomes capable of helping others find the courage to attempt their own transformations. The weak self that Marcus had destroyed years earlier could never have imagined the cosmic responsibilities and opportunities that his transformation would make possible. But the strong self that emerged from that destruction was proving equal to challenges that spanned dimensional boundaries and cosmic epochs. And, in helping others find the strength to destroy their own limitations, Marcus had discovered the most profound form of existence, a life dedicated to enabling the growth and expansion of consciousness throughout the universe itself. The little dragon's heartfelt request had become the foundation for humanity's transition into cosmic citizenship, and Marcus's personal transformation had become the template for the elevation of an entire species. In learning that strength comes from complete destruction and rebuilding of weakness, he had discovered not just personal power, but the ability to guide others toward their own transcendence. And, across the dimensional barriers that separated reality into countless planes of existence, the network of conscious beings that comprised the cosmic community welcomed humanity's emergence with the recognition that consciousness, properly developed and guided, represents the universe's greatest treasure and its most profound responsibility. End of document. Total word count, approximately 8,000 words.